Part 1. Morning in New York always glows in its own special way. Sunlight pours through the enormous glass windows of the skyscrapers, reflecting down on the rushing crowd along the avenue. Cars are bumper to bumper, horns blaring, footsteps echoing as thousands of office workers flood into the world's financial center. In that sea of people, no one notices a quiet figure slipping through the massive revolving door of Walker & Company, a financial giant headquartered in Manhattan. Marcus Brown. He is in his early 40s. His back is slightly bent from years of labor. He wears a faded slate blue janitor's uniform, bleached from countless washes. In his left hand, he carries a bucket of water, in his right, a mop. He has no shiny name tag like the directors, no expensive tie or fine leather briefcase. But every morning, he arrives early, while the upper floors remain dark, to keep those luxurious rooms sparkling. That day, Marcus steps onto the 50th floor into the boardroom. The room is vast, the polished wood floor gleaming like glass. A long oval glass-topped table dominates the center. And abstract art worth hundreds of thousands of dollars hangs on the walls. He bends down, gently dusting each leather chair, straightening the bottled water placed before every seat. It is familiar work, repeated day after day, but for Marcus, he does it with absolute care, as if he owned the room. Then the door swings open. Heavy footsteps, leather shoes clacking sharply on the floor. Men and women in sleek suits stream in, clutching laptops, papers, coffee. Standing out among them is a white man, about 50, salt and pepper hair slicked back, a tailored expensive suit, walking with full confidence. He is Richard Walker, the CEO, a name feared across Wall Street. They say a nod from him can make a startup a unicorn, while a frown can wipe out hundreds of millions on the market. Marcus bows his head and speaks politely. "Good morning, Mr. Walker. Good morning, everyone." He means it as a simple courtesy. But in that moment, the room seems to hold its breath. Richard glances at Marcus and then suddenly sneers. His laugh echoes in the space like the slash of a sharp blade. "You will always be a cleaner. Don't ever dream of sitting at this table." No one on the board reacts. Some directors exchange glances, a few force a tense smile. Others turn away to avoid awkwardness. In that stifling atmosphere, Marcus stands there, mop still in hand. He does not get angry. He does not object. He only offers a quiet, strangely calm smile. But in his eyes, bright and deep as the long Atlanta night, there is something perceptible to the keenest observers, a silent flame. But challenge unspoken, a signal that this story is not over. In the room where the most powerful man has just cast scorn, few notice that the janitor standing quietly will one day make the financial world bow in attention. Part 2. Marcus Brown was born south of Atlanta, where narrow winding streets still bear the scars of hard times. His neighborhood was filled with old brick houses, peeling paint, broken down fences, and barefoot children darting between fire engine sirens. His father, a construction worker, died in a workplace accident when Marcus was just 10. From then on, his mother, Helen, became the sole provider. She worked as a waitress in a small diner, standing behind the counter until midnight, her hands rough from washing dishes in hot water. In their cramped home, Marcus often sat alone with old books his mother had picked up at a flea market. The skinny kid did not lose himself in video games or basketball like his friends. Instead, he was captivated by numbers. He loved math. To him, complex equations were as beautiful as a symphony. At 14, he could solve problems meant for older students. As he grew, he began reading about finance, the stock market, and how money could change the world. But Marcus's educational path was never smooth. When he entered college with a modest scholarship, barriers immediately appeared. He was often the only student of color in his finance classes, always feeling the wary glances of professors and peers. Then his mother fell ill. It was chaos. Tuition, medicine, living expenses, all fell squarely on his shoulders. With no other option, Marcus dropped out and went to work to support his mother and younger sister. He took the only job available that required no degree, a janitor at a huge financial firm in New York. Day after day, he walked with a broom, cloth, bucket. People saw him as a shadow, part of the building's behind the scenes. But at night, after everyone else had gone, Marcus stayed behind. In the cramped break room under a flickering fluorescent light, he devoured finance books and economic reports. Teaching himself stock analysis, he enrolled in a low-cost online MBA program, paying for each module with his modest savings. No one saw it, but each night, he was building another world, another future. The only one who noticed was Lisa Carter, a 30-something African-American secretary in administration. She often saw Marcus reading late into the night. One evening, she asked, "Why are you studying all this stuff, Marcus?" He looked up and smiled gently. "To prepare for the day I sit at that boardroom table, even though for now I'm just cleaning the floor beneath them." Lisa watched him for a long moment and then quietly replied, "You really have a gift. Don't ever let that uniform define you." From that moment on, Lisa became a rare companion to Marcus. She listened to his passionate financial analyses and sometimes offered feedback on presentations he prepared for himself. Presentations no one had asked him to make, in a society that boxed him in as just the janitor. Marcus quietly nurtured his extraordinary mind, and he understood deeply that someday, the world would be forced to see it. Part 3. It was a Friday afternoon, just as the office was winding down for the weekend, when Marcus stepped into the boardroom to begin cleaning. The long conference table was still cluttered with coffee cups and scratch paper filled with messy numbers. It was a familiar sight, but today, something was different. The executive meeting had not yet ended. Marcus paused at the doorway. He was about to step back out to avoid interrupting, but a young director called out, "It's okay, go ahead and clean, we're going to be here for a while." So Marcus quietly worked in a corner of the room. He had no idea he was about to witness one of the board's most heated debates. They were discussing a venture capital deal, a tech startup seeking hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. The directors were arguing intensely. One was worried about the risk. Another insisted it was a golden opportunity. As reports piled up and tangled numbers flashed across the screen, Marcus stopped and listened, and then he noticed something was wrong. He tried to keep mopping, but his hands trembled slightly. The formulas in his mind kicked in automatically. The risk ratios in that report, they were completely off. If they proceeded with that forecast, the company stood to lose tens of millions of dollars. His heart pounded. He knew he should not say anything. He was just a janitor. But before he could stop himself, the words were already out. "Excuse me, but I believe there's a mistake in the risk analysis. If you invest based on this forecast, the company could lose a lot of money." The room fell silent for a split second. Then came the laughter. A few directors exchanged glances. Some covered their mouths in a mocking grin. And then, the coldest, loudest laugh came from the head of the table. Richard Walker crossed his arms and smirked. "This world really is insane. A janitor, trying to teach his business?" His laughter set off the entire room. Marcus stood there, still holding his mop, but his eyes were blazing. He said nothing more, just bowed his head and continued working. The meeting eventually ended. The directors left, trailing behind a wave of ridicule. Marcus stayed behind, cleaning the floors under the dim amber lights of the now empty boardroom. No one noticed that the words he spoke today would soon echo through the entire building. A few weeks later, the news hit. That investment deal had nearly cost the company tens of millions. The financial report had indeed contained the exact errors Marcus had pointed out. Fortunately, one young director, the same one who had voiced concern during the meeting, had quietly made adjustments based on Marcus's warning. Because of that, the company narrowly avoided a major collapse. Rumors spread quickly through the office. People began to whisper, "Did you hear? That janitor, he spotted a hole in the report that the entire board missed." The Guardian of Finance, that became Marcus's new nickname around the office. To Richard Walker, the whole affair only made him more irritated. But to everyone else, it was the first time they began looking at Marcus differently. He was no longer just an invisible man cleaning floors. He was a mystery, a secret the company had yet to uncover. Part 4. The real storm hit 1 year later. Walker & Company, once proud to call itself the Wolf of Wall Street, was plunged into a financial crisis unlike any it had seen. Stock prices tanked, and headlines flooded the media with suspicions of massive hidden debts. while the employees grew anxious. On the 50th floor, Richard Walker stood on a platform, trying to calm the storm. "It's just temporary market turbulence. The company is still safe in my hands." But the shareholders no longer believed him. An emergency meeting was called. The numbers glowing red on the screen told the brutal truth. The company was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. In the boardroom, Richard was sweating but still tried to maintain his pride. He blamed the finance department, the market, anyone but himself. The directors looked uneasy, and the shareholders were furious. The air was thick, ready to explode. And then, a voice rose from the back of the room. Lisa Carter, the quiet, unnoticed African-American secretary, stood up, her hands clenched tightly. "Excuse me, but I believe there's someone who can help the company see things clearly." Everyone turned. Richard raised an eyebrow, annoyed. "You're bringing in a lawyer? Or maybe some market analyst?" Lisa took a deep breath. "No, I'm bringing in Marcus Brown." The name hit the room like a rock dropped in still water. Murmurs spread. A few people laughed out loud. Richard scoffed. "Your janitor friend, this is ridiculous." But under pressure from a few directors who had heard of the Guardian of Finance, the board had no choice but to agree. And then, the door opened. Marcus stepped in, still in his humble janitor's uniform. His shoes were worn at the heels. In his hand, a tiny USB drive. He bowed slightly, his eyes calm. The whispers grew louder. One director sneered, "We're on the brink of collapse, and they brought in a janitor to save us." But as Marcus plugged in the USB and the projector lit up, the room slowly fell silent. The first slide appeared. Numbers, graphs, market data. No flair, no gimmicks, just raw truth. Marcus spoke, his voice low, steady. "These are the corrected reports. Mr. Richard has been using fabricated figures to hide company debt. If this continues, the company will collapse within 6 months." Some people frowned, others looked down at the papers in their hands. Richard jumped up, shouting, "Enough! He's just a janitor. Who believes this garbage?" But Marcus stood firm. He moved to the next slide, then the next, laying out each piece of evidence clearly. Shady transactions, overlapping loans, distorted figures. Every detail was as sharp and undeniable as daylight. The once noisy room was now dead silent. People started whispering again, but fell quiet as the evidence mounted. There was no escaping the truth. Marcus finished with a restructuring plan. Cut fake investments. Focus on profitable sectors. Renegotiate the debt. He used no fancy language, just spoke plainly, but every word hid with force. When the final slide disappeared, the room sat heavy in silence. All eyes were on Marcus. For the first time, Richard Walker's seat of power trembled. He had lost control. Part 5. In the heavy silence of the boardroom, every cold stare turned toward Richard Walker. He tried to keep his voice calm, but sweat was already glistening on his forehead. This is nothing but a fabrication, a joke. You cannot possibly believe the word of a janitor." But no one responded. A board member flipped through the printed report Marcus had handed out. Every detail, every piece of evidence matched perfectly, almost too perfectly. A major shareholder stood up, his voice rough. "Richard, do you have anything to refute this? Or have you been deceiving us all along?" Richard stammered, trying to dodge the question, but in front of him stood a mountain of undeniable proof. The arrogance that had built his reputation now turned into a fatal wound. Another director spoke coldly. "We cannot let this company sink under a web of lies. I propose that Richard Walker be immediately removed from his position as CEO." Those words hit like a hammer. The entire room nodded in agreement. A swift vote was held, and for the first time in the history of Walker & Company, the once powerful CEO was removed right in the middle of a board meeting. Richard collapsed into his chair, face pale, with no one left on his side. Standing in the room was Marcus, the man in a janitor's uniform, still holding a small USB in his hand. A board member turned to him, speaking slowly. "Marcus Brown, what do you want? A reward, a position, or just recognition?" Marcus looked around. The afternoon light streamed in through the towering glass windows, illuminating a face that had spent years in quiet service. He smiled, not proudly, not bitterly, just calmly. "All I want is a chance to prove my true value." That honesty stirred the room. The same faces that once mocked him now sat in respectful silence. After a brief exchange, the chairman announced, "From this moment forward, Marcus Brown will serve as special financial advisor to the company." Marcus slowly walked to the boardroom table. The leather chair that once symbolized power, the one Richard had sat in, the one from which he had mocked Marcus, was now waiting for him. He placed his hand on the armrest and took his seat. No more mop in hand, only a pair of bright, steady eyes. In that moment, the janitor became the one who leads. Part 6. The story of what happened in that boardroom spread like wildfire. By the next morning, major financial newspapers in New York ran bold headlines. "Powerful CEO taken down by a janitor. The janitor who saved the company." TV, radio, and social media exploded with the news. Everyone was talking about Marcus Brown, the quiet black man in a janitor's uniform who did what an entire board of directors could not. He saw the truth. In his first interviews, Marcus never bragged. He spoke with a calm voice. "I was never trying to be a hero. I just wanted to prove that a person's value should never be defined by their skin color or their job title." His story quickly moved beyond the company. It touched the hearts of millions, especially those who had been looked down on, dismissed, or held back by prejudice. Janitors across America wrote him letters, saying they found new hope to keep learning, to dream again, to stand tall. Marcus used his bonus and newfound fame to establish the Brown Scholarship Fund, helping underprivileged black youth pursue studies in finance and economics. Every scholarship opened a door to a future once slammed shut. Lisa Carter, the woman who had believed in him from day one, became his close partner. Together, they founded a nonprofit dedicated to teaching financial literacy in minority communities, helping thousands of families break the cycle of poverty. From a moment of humiliation in a boardroom, Marcus had turned his personal story into a movement. People no longer called him janitor. Now, he was a symbol of the belief that justice is not just for the powerful, but for anyone brave enough to stand for the truth. Part 7. The story of Marcus Brown is not just one man's journey. It is proof of something much bigger, that any of us, no matter where we start, can change our destiny if we dare to believe in ourselves. Think back to that first moment, a powerful CEO, with a smirk full of contempt, ridiculing a black janitor. In his eyes, Marcus was just a floor cleaner, nothing more. But what Richard never expected was that in that silence, Marcus was nurturing a different kind of power, the power of knowledge, of belief, and of a will that never dies. The day Marcus stood before the board, still in his janitor's uniform, yet armed with truth and intelligence, it was more than a personal victory. It was a victory for everyone who has ever been stepped on, doubted, or told, "You'll never make it." If you are listening to this story, chances are, somewhere in your life, you have felt that moment too, when you were underestimated, overlooked, pushed aside because of where you come from, what you look like, your gender, or your job. And in that moment, you had two choices: to give up or to keep going. Just like Marcus did, this story is not meant to be heard and forgotten. It is a reminder that justice only exists when people are willing to stand up for the truth. That change never comes from those who sit and accept, but from ordinary people with extraordinary courage, ready to show the world their worth. So if Marcus's story touched you, do not let it end here. Share it so others can find hope too. Because somewhere out there, another Marcus is studying in silence, working in the shadows, waiting for a story like this to give them strength. Click like so the algorithm spreads this message to more hearts. Click share so a simple yet powerful message reaches the world. Never let anyone define your worth. And hit subscribe, because there are more stories like this. Stories of faith, resilience, and justice, waiting to be told. Before you go, I want to leave you with one question. If you were Marcus, standing in that moment of contempt, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments below. Do not stay silent, because sometimes a single word from you can spark hope in someone who truly needs it. This is not just the story of Marcus Brown. This is the story of all of us.